Hello, young pianists. I have several advices. Make sure you never play the pedal with the bass note or even the melody note, not on the beat. Immediately after, as if you catch the tail of the comet for the resonance. Okay, if you are a little too late, by a fraction, you might miss the bass note. But it's worth it, because it gives that sense of lifting all the dampers in the offbeat. And so you always are projecting to the next beat, harmonically, the pulse, the rhythm. And then another thing, polyphony. Don't try to choose what to bring out. Try to hear all of the elements at the same time. It's almost cacophonic in your head, but then you seemingly isolate one as if you shed light on a given element of the layering, multi-layering. This way, the piece reveals itself differently every time you play it. And that is something that you should cherish. Not try to lock things in as if when you practiced in order to secure. You don't secure anything. You have to deal with the unexpected of the stage. And then use the immediacy of the moment. Train your ear to be always aware. Train your brain to be always ahead, so that every section through which you arrive, transition or without, you're already technically ready to approach it accordingly to the topography of the terrain of the keys, so that you anticipate your dispositions, so that you can sculpt the texture of the keyboard. Shift faster than the beats in order to touch before you play, no matter what dynamic range. Don't forget, always play fast, deep from the keys, not above when you want to play soft dynamic chords. They have to be together because your fingers would be straight, piloted by the palm with the apparent knuckles. The wrist, under or at level, never above, gives you the freedom to not be tense because you support under the palm, the articulation. Thumb, diagonal or horizontal for scales, diagonal for chords, and vertical for most of the elements where, if it's fast patterns, you don't want to hear which fingers plays what, since most of the music is written to be played evenly, except if you want to bring out some pulse accent because of the score or your imagination, but most of the time not. Another thing, chromaticisms. It's the plague for the pedal. You only have one keyboard, so therefore you cannot, even with the middle pedal, you only can isolate so much, and you have to time it. Therefore it becomes a little bit of unnatural organization. But don't forget that the chromaticism, especially in the right hand, take Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, are decorative patterns, passing tones. They are there to be that spice, that special scent, that signature of a given tonality, which could be half minor, half major. The chromaticism tends to go towards minor because of the semitones, which are most the minor signature. But you could have a bottom tetrachord minor, top major. It doesn't matter. It has to be always clear. You want not to have the right foot pedal on the right hand chromaticisms. And therefore you have to use as much as possible finger pedal in order to change very often the pedal, or try not to much, and use a lot of substitutions to allow for this clarity. You know, ultimately you play for the people a piece which either they know or they don't, it doesn't matter ultimately. You reveal it because you embody it. You bring it to life. And during that very moment, this ephemeral eternity, it's you and the piece. And you want to serve it, you don't want to miss it, you don't want to mess it up, you don't want to be a fool. Of course, I understand that. Stage fright is a lot about maintaining, I don't find the word, holding a certain distance with what you play in order to not be overwhelmed by the short breath of an emotion, or held breath when a texture or a section is difficult. That's what I wanted to say. Maintain yourself a little a distance from what you do. And then let the music speak by itself. Let the modulation without crescendo or diminuendo or rubato, unless you really cannot not. But not all the time, everywhere, all the time. There has to be a hierarchy. And it can be intuitive. You don't have to rehearse it and decide, here I'll do that, there I'll do that. Because the way things happen, the piano talks to you, the acoustics, the atmosphere, your own unexpected relationship with the piece reveals you the piece in a way you didn't practice it. So allow that and manage on the spot as if it was meant to be. Sometimes you have to be not in the situation where you regret that it doesn't go as well as practiced, because it's not supposed to be that. The practicing is to secure for you to be so proactive and give the illusion that it's all planned, even if it's not. Because anyway, unless you make a recording with many takes and you can choose, then you have some kind of idealization of the conception of the interpretation. But in the concert, it has to be an exchange with the moment. And that's what people also like in a concert. Perhaps they're not aware that a concert is not a recording. The micro and the macro are very difficult to manage. You have to be so focused, concentrated, so relaxed with the arms, so specifically stiff in the palm, but not in the wrist or the forearm or the shoulder. Oh, I know. Oh, this is so easy to say. And in real time, so difficult to do. But you know, the truth is, a performance is like life. You had a bad day, you think the next day will be better. And that's what you do. It didn't go very well, but you'll practice and you'll try again, and again, and again. And you'll be given a chance to play it, and if you are less chances to play, you have less competitive or less opportunity to gather a higher level of experience. So if the performances are far apart, you don't build up this kind of stage shield, if I may call it so, psychologically. But that's probably also for the better, because you want to be, as I said, let the music speak. Don't choke it. And when the audience is there, they know that you're vulnerable. But they also like that you dare be there, defend what you love in the piece. And I think this is the most important, what I call the readability of your interpretation by the audience. Of course, they don't read it, but they read in your choices. Slow down at the end of a sentence, at the punctuation, at the double bar, at the repeat, or not. Follow the intuitive tension release of a phrase, or just bridge further. So you can play very musical in the sense of intuitive connection to the expression of the musical tension release, breathing, exhaling, harmony, melody. And then discover a way to say, I'm going to take you by the hand, audience member, and let me show you that if we don't stop around this, we can get there and have a better perspective of what we just did. These things can be, of course, in an analytical interpretation, codified at the practicing, at the lesson, at the master class, but I think it should be intuitive. It should be left to the moment. And I find that this is the moment where you reveal truly who you are, your culture, your history, your understanding. Perhaps, and I say that very honestly, perhaps one's misunderstanding. Of course, you cannot convince people since there is no objective truth to it. You only can be convincing by your involvement. And I find that the more you travel in life with the piece, the more the piece reveals itself to you differently every time. That appears to be very inconsequential. What's the point to study if I don't have a cumulative progress organization and then something that holds solid like a structure, like an organization, like a construction? Unfortunately, the strongest I know of a construction in interpretation, public live performance, is the analogy to the sand castle on the beach before the wave. Oh, the big wave doesn't come right away, but you know at the get-go it's ephemeral. But it's beautiful because it's ephemeral. It's the journey, not the destination. And the journey is unforgivable sometimes, but mostly unforgettable. Not for you because you're, driving the steam engine, and therefore you have to always think ahead and don't realize how much of what came out from what you intended, because you cannot be and have been at the same time. So the audience is the ones who connect to your spark, to your intensity, to your human weaknesses. And don't be fooled. Every generation admires pianists who play impeccably, no matter what, no matter where, all the time. Fine. But this is an exception. It's not the rule. Of course, teaching, I try to find for the students the reliable fingerings, the reliable anticipation of the gestures, the position of the forearm, the elbow, the shoulders, everything according to each section. So you maximize your opportunities and minimize your risks by avoiding the quote-unquote ill gesture, which ends up by producing the wrong note or the wrong shifting or the wrong amount of shifting. And these kind of little mistakes are annoying because, well, they don't erase the grand gesture of your phrasing, of your storytelling, of the narrative transcendence of the musical intention of the piece itself through you. The fact that in competition people can play more precisely and more reliably than you might make you feel less worthy of and less reliable, therefore. So yes, as a teacher, I try to give all the elements to avoid in a cognitive muscular memory the inevitable or possibly evitable accident. Is also a question of intensity of concentration and how long that can last. Psychological lack of overdose of discomfort to be on stage, lack of not being less reserved than you are, but that's how you are. We all are reserved. Being on stage is not an exhibitionism. It's a way to say to the audience, I am one of you while I play it. Let us share the beautiful piece. placing yourself in this psychological situation, you embrace the positives and you're less disturbed by the negatives. You always have time to rethink what went through the obstacle course wrong, mostly. You can give in yourself, in self-criticism, even if the audience is roaring, a percentage or a rating compared to what you intended to reach and not what you reached. Now, of course, the audience doesn't know what you intended to reach. So therefore, you're always more disappointed of yourself because you haven't reached the ideal of the ideals. That is the musicianship flowing, the technique reliable, and the piano responding through your touch to all the demands of dynamic ranges, tempi, and everything. Well, some things go better than others, but of course, you're also aware that your nose is on the detail. But the audience, they hear the storytelling. They expect to be entertained, driven, moved, reflection, perhaps even energy that comes through you gives them the drive to be sort of like a sports audience playing with you by proxy. I don't talk about the critics and the people who are purists and the people who come there to show that they know better than you and they dislike what you did. And even if it is possibly right that you have some weaknesses that you have to address, some more or less or more. But let them go on stage and try. Of course, nobody obliges you, nobody obliges them. But I find that it's more meaningful for an audience member to go there to be marveled and say, hey, I come here to live intensely the storytelling. It's poetic, it's dramatic, it's humorous, it's all of the above together or in consequential numbers or movements. And there is the moment that you play that matters. Because yes, objectively, you can restart like in a recording and say, oh, I can do this detail better to fit the general purpose of the grand gesture. But that's not true in the live performance. And I think people, in fact, in the audience, don't hear so much the mistakes as much as you hear them in proportion to what is the piece which you play in terms of the completion of the piece. So of course you see the defects and you realize them, but you think that that's what prevails in your playing on this ephemeral moment of communion sharing with the audience. But in fact, for the audience in concert, the mistakes are not heard. Or if they are not heard essentially like in a recording when they might re-listen several times to the track until they start detecting eventually more of the defects. But what they enjoyed is having been there, sharing this with the other audience members, anonymous people gathered together at different levels of perception of the music according to their knowledge or their hearing or their emotional connection to the style or the genre. That's such variety of approaches. But they gather either because they know you or they know the piece or they want to hear how you play the piece. Whichever reason they're there. And I think that the most beautiful in a concert is to accept it at the get-go and just let the music flow. Don't drive watching the rear mirror from time to make sure, but not all the time. And if something went wrong, don't get angry at yourself because you're losing concentration energy for anticipation for the next section, the next movement, the next breathing. These are very much advices from experience that I give you. Make every moment special because the music is special. Not you, not the audience. We all passing, but the piece remains. It was worshipped, loved, and admired and adored by generations before you, and after you too, it will be the case. Even if people perhaps will perceive it differently. After all, times evolve, psyches evolve, the point of view of understanding of a style for classical music lovers changes too. The famous sentence, "It's not supposed to be played like that," always makes me laugh, as if each of them knows how it was played when we don't have recordings. We only have treatises, scores, and assumed ways of playing according to the so-called tradition, which of course is vanished with the people of the time of that tradition. And since we play a music from another time period away from that tradition that we recreate according to our own psyche of the today, or whenever today is, tomorrow also is the next today, inevitably it's more important to bring that coherence of your inner hearing of the piece and what it means to you, and how you adorn it with the pedaling, the phrasing, the legato, or the quality of the touch, the secondary voices. It's not all these elements that make the piece moving. It's the piece is moving no matter what. I can make it more or less according to what it means to you. But you have to assume that and say, hey, that's what I can do in the piece today. I could do it better, but in general terms, that's what I believe of the piece as a conception, interpretation, understanding. I know they're very pompous words. But there is some level of humility in the intensity of the moment shared, people holding their breath in a slow movement, cadence with the breath before the next sentence. There is something about the intimacy of this apparently exhibitionist situation where you are through notes and not words, not your own, but somebody else's, while playing it with a conviction as if it's yours in order to be believed. It's still, for many people, a situation where they feel that it's an invasion of their privacy or of their reserve, a natural reserve, regardless of the different temperaments. Because it's not just an obstacle course, it's a statement of being. And this intimacy that is created with the audience ephemerally during a moment through the piece, of course, reveals a lot about who you are. And they want to connect to you and say, oh, if I could play this piece, I'll play it like that. And if they already play the piece, they'll say, oh, I don't want to play it like this, I prefer them my way. Fine. And that's what I think is very important, to not consider there is a single way. There are obviously limits to the ways of being differently played in tempo, phrasing, articulation, pedaling, rubato, or even ornamentation, decoration, improvisatory sections, name it and more. But even if it's customized according to your taste, it will evolve. I guarantee you it will evolve. And normally what happens is that the more you evolve with the piece, the least you're worried about betraying it. It's like an old friend for whom you have such affection, the piece, I mean. And old stories, hey, remember when we had a memory slip in I don't know which concert, and I almost lost you, but I caught you on time. It's 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 a bittersweet, but it's more sweet than bitter situation of affection for the piece. Oh, of course, it sounds arrogant to say, who am I to place myself at the level of the piece, of the composer? He's a genius, and the piece is genius, and all that. I think those are unnecessary negative thoughts that can be told after, but not during. During the performance, you're immersed in an alternate reality. Call it escapism. And during these ephemeral moments, you live intensely your life, the purpose of it, when it means so much to you. So continue being dissatisfied, it will make you progress. Don't get disappointed or crushed by the way things went compared to what you planned they should go. And utmost importantly, love the piece. Every piece you play, even if you're not sure you fully understand what really it means and how it's supposed to be brought out. Something or more or less, this or that, and people taught you, you heard people, visible part of icebergs from different interpretation, or teachers who explain to you from the bottom up, even the things that are hidden in the roots of the choices for the interpretation. And at some point, no matter how much you have filtered all this information, you're alone in front of the piano with the audience as partners. Please do that. Consider them partners. Don't get afraid of them. They don't bite. Nor does the piano. I know it's very difficult when you have stage fright. I know it's very difficult to even breathe or even irrigate the brain without inhaling enough to exhale and not hold your breath when the texture of the technical elements are difficult. I know we do that intuitively because we're cautious, careful, attentive. But the more you live with the piece in public, the more you learn how to manage it. In fact, learning it, practicing it in this solitude of practicing meaningfully, attentively, detailedly, and all, but then you put it together and then it starts living. The first day you play it in front of people, oh, of course you're nervous. And then the second time you play it, whenever it happens to be in time. And then the third, and the fourth, and the 10th, and the 20th. And every time it reveals itself differently to you and you're puzzled. But you shouldn't, as I said earlier, try to lock it in one single way through. You should technically be so secure in your muscular memory that cognitively nothing can go wrong. And even if it does, it doesn't matter, because what really matters is how you tell the storytelling. Believe me, this is the way. I have no magic wand, but I have good fingerings to give you. And then the rest, you filter it all through your own self. If those fingerings make you not invulnerable, but more reliable for details that bother you because they sort of work out by chance, is shifting to a bass note. Out of 3, 2 are clean, 1 is not. You get angry at yourself. Why did it happen? Oh my God, I'm in public. All that is negative thoughts, because then it stops enough of the brain to think, free all the neurons to think ahead and don't regret what just happened on the spot while you play.